All
Ah,
right.
I suffer for the titties. Oh, hey, we're recording. All right, it's okay. We are already established as an adult channel, and for the 13-year-olds who are watching, titties. All right, so we are going to be talking about first person perspective and first-person shooters today. And I find this to be a very broad category, but I find it's an enjoyable one to talk about because you don't think there's much that goes into it, but there's a lot of minor mechanics and details that really put it one first person perspective over another. One thing I like to pinpoint on actually is I love to see games that include true to character shadows and reflections. I think that is one of the cooler things to see in a first person style game. It's not there's like a lot of games that make cuts, like Call of Duty. If you look in a mirror, you're not going to see yourself. It's like blurry, in most of them. And I don't know. I find like games that go that extra length and do that is just really impressive to me because it's kind of like I don't know what the mechanics are for that, what they got to do, but it's cool.
Yeah, as far as like just for that first person perspective and shooter feel, I feel like like it's a lot of the games you play fall into that category, so it kind of gets redundant at points that you kind of forget about the details that they put into a first person shooter because of what you see, whether it's your body, the weapon you're holding, the object you're holding, and just I kind of thought about it over the years how first person shooters have become more and more detailed, more and more. I don't know. They just put a lot more effort into them, and we kind of never realized it. Like things like weapon sway, like and just like the interaction with your environment. One big thing is when you look down, you see the rest of your body now. Years
Exactly.
ago, you would look down and you just see the ground. You wouldn't see your body. Um, Another thing, or yeah, and then just the details of the weapons and stuff with how rather than them just being kind of boxy and like even the noise of them they put detail into where different guns sound different versus back in the day you shot a rifle sniper shotgun they all sounded the same so so just over the years it's kind of been one of those things that I didn't really sit down and ponder it on it until we like preparing for this episode that I realized wow 10 years ago playing first person shooters they were super cut and dry as far as what you saw what you got out of the game versus now um, it's very detailed and it's things that kind of go over our heads that we don't realize because we're focused on other parts of the game.
Oh yeah, definitely. When you cut back to like some of these older games and you look at the way you're moving while holding a weapon, a lot of the times that weapon is fixed. It's like this, and there's no movement. It's literally just fixed in front of you, and then as you turn, your weapon turns with you like this. It's not like a as you're turning around, you're bringing the weapon around. It's literally just this fixed boop boop boop. It feels robotic. It feels very unrealistic, and it takes you out of the game for a bit. Um, and I do find it interesting that uh, how there are still games in modern day that are, like their first person perspectives are not like like the greatest thing about them, but it's still done well, if that makes sense. Because you there's games that you can play like Minecraft, and one game I like to give a shout out to is Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is a really fun, true to lore medieval game. Like it's awesome. The first person perspective in it is very amusing and entertaining. And to get into shooters, uh, one thing I find interesting about shooters though are the ones that implement third person and first person because it's kind of like most of the time I find myself like for one example games like we recently were playing DayZ or PUBG are I find myself in third person more than anything, but it's kind of cool to have that option to be able to interchange to the first person perspective if need be, if there's a situation where it will benefit me more. And it's nice to have like, and it's cool to see game developers move in that direction to where they're trying to implement both into their game. And then there are games where like first person perspective would probably be kind of weird. Um, I'd probably say like I don't know how I'd feel about playing, for example, like a Devil May Cry game in a first person perspective. It's not its style. It's not what it's meant to be. Uh, So yeah, there's definitely. I think Gears of War. Gears of War is another one I just feel like would be very very weird in a first person perspective, just because of how much you move. You probably kind of get sick, like just all
Yeah,
the fast, rapid movements.
yeah, and
Uh,
then I just kind of thought of one thing with how probably the most popular first person shooter out there is Call of Duty, obviously. I was just thinking about back to I think it was Modern Warfare 2, and I'd have to confirm this, but I'm pretty sure Modern Warfare 2 had a third person view game mode. It was like a special game mode where it was just like regular team deathmatch, or it might have been a mosh pit, but it was third person. And
really?
I remember trying it a few times and I absolutely hated it. Just because back in the day, whatever Modern Warfare 2 is 10 years ago, like younger me just enjoyed that first person perspective, and just because it's simple. And that's one thing I jotted down in my notes is if you're kind of jumping into video games and it's something new, whether you're a part of the younger audience, or maybe it's a hobby you're picking up later in your life. I feel like the first person shooter, first person perspective games are kind of a good starting point, just because it helps you to focus on the straight mechanics of the game. It kind of gives you tunnel vision as
Yeah,
far
I was
as
literally about to make that point. I was gonna say, yeah, it gives you tunnel vision. It's how you're used to looking at things with your perspective. Whereas third person,
yeah.
you're omnidirectional. You can see everything around you, and it creates a sense of kind of like almost like it's almost too much in the moment. If you're not adept at gaming, it almost can be kind of overwhelming because there's so much like around you to pay attention to. And then obviously if you're in a game that's a third person shooter type perspective and you're versing other people, these are people who are probably more well versed in it. It can create this kind of unbalance in your play style. And yeah, you'll adjust, you'll acclimate to it, but ultimately you kind of struggle to at first. Whereas with a first person perspective, if you understand the basic mechanics of the game, chances are you're going to be able to do decent at the game.
Yeah, for sure. And um yeah, kind of how I was talking about that tunnel vision. It kind of dumbs down the game for you, because if you're playing a game in third person, it makes you more aware of your environment and makes you. It, I guess now I kind of like the third person view more as well, as far as like we're talking about Daisy, um, even like Fallout. I find myself playing more in third person than I did before, just because it's I'm more appreciative of the environment. And plus, it's games that like the more I play them, the more I try out the different settings, whether it's switching from third to first or first to third perspective, just kind of expanding the box of that game, because obviously it can be very grindy, repetitive if you just play in the same point of view in every game out there. So I think it's important, even though this episode is focused on that first person perspective. I think that if the games you play do offer a third person option, I think it's something that everybody should try. And I mean, if you hate it, fine, come back to it again later. Maybe it was just whatever point of the game you're in. Maybe it was difficult going third person. It kind of like you said, it depending on the situation, or like whatever is happening, going into first person could be more of an advantage. Like if you're shooting a weapon, for instance, it's easier to use it in first person than third, because rather than using like the iron sights or the sight on the gun in first person, you're banking on the crosshair that's on your screen in third. So
Oh yeah.
it definitely depends on the situation you're in, but first person definitely seems like the one that has more accuracy to it, but it takes you less out of the game. It puts you in this smaller box of, again, that tunnel vision, what you're seeing, what you're interacting with, versus third person, being able to see your environment, being able to see stuff coming up from the side or behind you, even. Um, so, yeah.
Oh yeah, and then one point to make off of kind of the caveat of what you were saying. For me, and this may be different for other players, this is in my own personal perspective, but in first person, I can gauge things like bullet drop and recoil of my gun a lot better than I can in a third person perspective. I can't really like I can read those, but it takes a little bit longer for me to kind of pick up on it versus like if I'm in that first person perspective, especially like in a sniper rifle situation, which there's never been a sniper rifle in a game that's not. I mean, I'm sure there's out there where I don't know how that works. That'd be kind of stupid. It's kind of you take away the point of a sniper rifle. But either way, like that's why I enjoy playing snipers a lot of the time in games because I can figure out those things. I can figure out where my round's impacting based off that perspective. Because obviously, if you're in a third person perspective and you're using, say, like I don't know, AK-47 in PUBG, your rounds you can see where they're going, kinda. But when you're in the first person's perspective, you can see like, okay, it's hitting. I can see the burst right there. I need to readjust. And then you Kentucky windage, which is something that you shouldn't actually really do when trying to learn how to shoot in real life, but whatever, because your sight's not zeroed. But when you're in that first person perspective, you can kind of see where that round's impacting, and then you just kind of readjust according to that. And then it also is a lot easier, in my opinion, to trap. So in shooting, there's a thing called trapping, where it's like there's trapping and there's tracking. Tracking is if you're the kind of shooter who scans your gun over and following the movement pattern of the person you're trying to shoot or whatever it is you're trying to shoot, you're tracking it, you're following it, and then you hit, and then you pull the trigger. Trapping is where you move your cursor, your weapon, as you will, to the location where you think they're going to be moving to. You place it there and you wait. And that's why it's called trapping. And that's a lot easier for me to execute in a first-person perspective because I have a lot better control of the weapon I'm using versus in the third-person perspective, it's kind of like you have that loose crosshair that's kind of it's a little dispersed until you go into a crouch position most of the time in these kind of games, then it'll condense a little bit, but then you're still relying on that crosshair, whereas when you're actually looking through an optic or over an iron sight, you can actually have that more pinpoint accuracy.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how you talked about the trapping versus tracking, like the movements of a first person shooter. It kind of makes you think about how, like, I guess depending on what game you're playing, I noticed that there's tendencies where I'll do one versus the other. Um, One being like, I feel like even from like Call of Duty, for instance, going from multiplayer to Warzone, I feel like in multiplayer you use more of the trapping mechanism because these maps are all the same. They're not changing versus like Warzone where they've added things that are different. It's a map that you probably wouldn't be able to be thrown into it blindfolded and be able to figure out your way around it versus you get dropped into a multiplayer map. Say you're on Shoot House, and they say, "All right, we're dropping you in Shoot House and A spawn. Get to the C spawn." You'd probably be able to figure it out, just because most Call of Duty maps have those lanes. You have your left lane, right lane, middle lane. So you'd be able to kind of you have that memorized in your head where certain crates are, certain objects are that you need to maneuver through, and kind of trailing back to the trapping versus targeting. The trapping kind of goes into the camping of games. How like it's you go into a room, there's a guy watching the door and camping, and it's like, oh, it's annoying, but it's also it's as annoying as it is. It's a strategy.
It is a strategy.
It's a play style, and it's that trapping play style that you're talking about, rather than trying to track through walls where people might be outside of that building. You're trapping them at that door or at
Exactly.
that window where they're going to come through. Eventually somebody's going to walk through that door, so you're trapping that entry point.
And to make a point on that, and I think this is where a very controversial thing for gamers. I've been on both sides of this. I've bitched about it, and I've supported. Like I support it while bitching about it because it is frustrating. It is hard when you have someone who has something locked down. But here's the thing: if you think about it, a camper is the easiest person to kill. If you are proficient enough at the game, they are one of the easiest people to kill, even if they have that area locked down. If you have good communication with your team, if you have two people versus one, he's not going to get both of you. He can't unless he has someone in there with him. Because and this is the thing when it comes to firefights and shooting, the best, and this is like it can come true to games too, is it'd be beneficial to always outnumber your opponent. And this is one thing, even in Warzone. That's why, like, one thing I was trying to stress when we used to play consistently was like 2 to 1, 2 to 1. Have two barrels on one guy, because if you have two barrels on one guy, that's twice the firepower. He will be dropped, and you just cut their team down in size. You just eliminated one person of their team now, and you have fire superiority. But getting back to the whole tracking and trapping principle, so when you have this camper in place, it is, like you said, a tactic. They are just taking more of a defensive posture. They are positioning themselves in a security hold. They are making sure that they are locking down a point that they know is a high traffic area, which is a tactic. It is 100%. I will not consider it, like we've talked about exploitations. That is not an exploitation. The snapshot grenade we experience, that's an exploitation, because they're sitting there with the understanding of
You good?
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I saw you typing. I thought you were like saying something to me, like, oh,
Oh,
like,
no, no, sorry. I jot down notes as we talk so
oh, I love that. No, okay, I love that. It's just I know I have some interaction issues over this because of this computer sometimes. But yeah, no. So it is not an exploitation. An exploitation is the whole when the AS Val was godlike, and you could just throw snapshot grenades into a room and just laser dudes through concrete walls, which is not realistic. You like now if you were to say go to a room, throw a snapshot grenade in there, and you see that they're in there, and you throw a frag grenade in there, completely different. That's not an exploitation. That's a tactic. And there's a thin line between tactic and exploitation for me. And there will be people who will argue it. They'll be like, well, that's not an exploitation. It's part of the game. It's not exploiting the game. It's like exploitation is by definition mechanics within the game that you're using to take advantage of. You're almost using a way to break the game. It's not like camping has never been breaking the game. It's always been a staple of Call of Duty. It, and honestly, I respect it because it is a strategy. It's smart. If you're a sniper, I don't expect you to run around.
yeah.
And like you're not like you don't have a shotgun in your hands. That's unrealistic. And if you can run around with a sniper and you're quick scoping, good on you. That's awesome. Like that's something you developed and you have the skill and the capability to do that, and you're not afraid to be more mobile with your rifle. Cool. But ultimately when you see me sniping, I'm not the only time I pick up is after I've taken down somebody, because now that I've established my position and I know if they're smart enough and they're a proficient enough player, they will either flank me or they will do something to divert my ability to engage them. So I'm going to pick up and move and just and set back into a different location that I know is good, is a high traffic area. And that's a cool thing about first person perspectives versus third person perspectives, since we're on that topic, is third person perspectives, it makes it a lot harder to camp. In third person perspectives, you can sit there, especially in games like PUBG, you can walk up to a building, you can be like right next to the door, right? You could open the door and you can kind of pan your camera around and you can start clearing that room visually before you even go into it. You can sit there and you can kind of pan your camera around. You can even sit behind the door and you can like watch over what's going on the other side of the door, versus in first person, if you're sitting on the side of a door, the only thing that you have going for you is audio, is you hear movement. And if they have dead silence, you don't know if they're coming until you see the visual break from the door frame to a figure slowly coming out of it. Then you have a visual of the person. And that's one thing I like about first person, is I think it keeps it more grounded, to where you can't just get locked in too easily, because that person only has this field of view right here, what's in front of them. You could easily get behind them and they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas third person, I can sit there and continually scan my camera around while I'm running, and I can see so many people moving, or I can see what's going on in my environment. I can even catch things that might benefit me, whereas like in first person, you may miss some loot. That's why they have audio cues in games like that. I know Fortnite's a third person. They also have the audio cue with their chests and stuff like that. But that's also because Fortnite's very colorful and it's distorted, so it can be very hard to visually pick out certain things. And you're on the move a lot in that game, if I remember correctly. You're constantly moving, building. And so with the first person perspective, a lot of it's a lot more audible. A lot of it's like you're just listening, you're hearing what's going on around you, and you're relying on that. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah. So would you agree then that in order to, I guess, max maximize your potential in a first person versus a third person shooter, it requires more skill to be good at a first person game then?
Uh, so I will say that's situational. I will definitely say that's situational because there are some third person games that I have played that are very difficult, but in terms of a shooter, I will say, in my opinion, yes, first person requires more skill and it relies more on secondary senses versus because most people rely on video games and visual. First and foremost, visual is your number one sense that you rely
Yeah.
on.
Oh yeah, because you could play a shooter game without a headset or any volume on your TV and
Oh
still be
yeah.
decent at it.
Oh yeah.
Just but obviously you're going to be blind. Like here is where you're going to maximize. Anything out here, you're fucked because you
Oh
can't
yeah.
hear it.
And then there's another thing too that gets hard with makes first person's perspective a little harder is if you have maxed out sensitivity, it is a lot more stressful on the eyes when you're spinning fast. Whereas third person, if you're spinning fast, that's the one thing that kind of like the advantage of that overwhelming area once you get used to it. When you're spinning really fast in a third person perspective, everything looks like it's moving slow to a degree to where you can actually retain what you're seeing around you in a third person perspective. Whereas a first person perspective, you're spinning really fast. It's all like it's everything looks like it's moving quick because it's in that tunnel vision locked view. So yeah, I definitely will say first person shooters, in my opinion, definitely are harder to develop and refine skills. They're easier to pick up and jump into, but to refine your skills is harder because there are little things you got to start to work on and emphasize on and really pay attention to. Like you and me, we play with maxed out audio just for the sake of because we know how important it can be in games like Warzone to hear movement. Like if I hear a glass break within 50 meters and it's none of my team, I know for a fact that there may be a potential firefight coming my way. Whereas third person perspective, more likely than not, I would have probably seen them. And audio does play an important role in third person games too. It's just you have a lot more visual awareness, so it kind of balances out 50-50. Whereas I feel like, yeah, visual is important, but I feel like sometimes I lean more on my hearing a lot of the times in first person perspective shooters. Uh, and just to like not to deviate too far, I just want to give a shout out to this. I mentioned it before. I think the game Super Hot is a really unique, interesting first-person perspective kind of game. That's you can consider some aspects of it in it are shooting because I love the mechanic of it. The game moves as fast as you move, and I think that's cool. I think that's a unique concept, and I want to give a shout out to that. I like that. That's dope. Uh, and then you get games like what's it called? Crap. It's an old game. It was made by the creators of Gears of War, and it was a first-person game. But
It
I
was made
can't
by
think of.
Coalition
I think so. Yeah.
or Epic Games.
I mean, Epic Games. Yeah.
Oh, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I'll come back to it eventually. One
Yeah.
of our other episodes, like I always say, and everyone's probably like waiting. Like, when's he gonna come back and mention all the stuff he talked about in his last podcast? Newsflash: never. I just say that for your sake. But
What point I wanted to touch on before I forget is when you talked about in a first person shooter, it's a lot more about refining your skills, taking the things that you're good at and taking it from that level of good to proficient, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, and it's that sensitivity. I feel like sensitivity plays a huge part, like you said, in that person perspective versus a third person, because you could be maxed out. You could be maxed out in sensitivity in a third person perspective, but it's not going to change your environment a whole lot. It's just basically going to reposition you faster within that environment. And one thing that I do, especially with Call of Duty, is and it's maxed out now, but I usually start at about like a medium to high sensitivity for my look controls, and then every couple weeks or like every month or so, I will bump up my sensitivity a point or half a point or whatever it gets, depending on how. Sometimes it goes by a full point, sometimes it goes by half points as far as the sensitivity. But I feel like it's important for every gamer to at least try that. Because honestly, if you play at, say, sensitivity 12 and the max is a 20, if you play at sensitivity 12 for a month and you switch it to 13, you're probably not going to notice a huge difference. Maybe for the first couple games, you'll notice, oh, I have to correct a little bit more. But guess what? After you play a handful of games or maybe a day or two of playing, that 13 is going to feel like a 12. And then after a week or two, guess what? You bump it up to a 14. Next thing you know, you're up 2 full points of sensitivity, which gives you better range of motion. It makes you quicker in your reaction time. Where if you do hear somebody to your left or right behind you, you hear glass break, and you realize, oh shoot, there's a window 5 feet away from me, you're able to quick snap to that point. Whereas if you have a low to medium sensitivity, you'd only be halfway to that window before you're dead. So but obviously having for anybody who's jumping into a game, if you play at like a 10 sensitivity, I'm not saying go change it to 20 right now because you're gonna suck ass for a
Oh
while.
yeah. Well, and I will not make any claims to being the best gamer in the world. Obviously, you don't see me in a professional circuit anytime soon. But I will give some tips to and advice towards that because I do think that is an important mechanic of developing yourself as a proficient player in any first-person shooter. Your sensitivity defines so much. It defines your quick reaction time, and that's one thing. It helps you build your reaction time. So, just a couple things I do personally for myself. Instead of doing the 1 point implementing for over a week span, what I usually do is I jump 5 points every 2 days. It's a more aggressive approach, and yeah, you're not going to see the results. It's going to be a little harder on you, but the reason I speed it up along so fast is because when I jump those 5 points, usually, so I've always been a high sensitivity player. I always love to whip around and spin really fast because sometimes if a guy misses a shot behind you with a shotgun and you just turn around and laser him, like, and it's a game changer. So I do the 5 point system because maybe the first two games will be a little rough for me. But after those first two games, I start to play a little bit more cautiously. I wind myself back. I'm like, all right, I have to adjust to my sensitivity now, and it actually allows me to play a little bit more reserved. Whereas usually I'm an attack style player. You've seen this in every game I've played with you. I'm very aggressive. I always like to push, and it's just how I've always been. I'm a blitzer. I like to blitz in any game, Rocket League, Call of Duty. I'm blitzing. I like to make sure that I'm staying on top of it, like on top of being aggressive without. Because I know I have very good defensive teammates. Like you are very what I would call like a shield. You're a shield player. You are very good at holding things down. You are very good at locking down positions, and you have a very good offense too. You're very well balanced. It's just your strong points have always been defensive. You are very good at playing defensive in a lot of the games I've played with you, and so if you're going to play aggressive, it's always nice to have a teammate like that to balance you out too, so you can adjust to that sensitivity as you're moving, and you may step back a bit and be more cautious. But then that's when I have a teammate like you who can compensate for that. When you don't see me doing as much, you see me sitting more objective based and not blitzing as hard as I was before. And that's the thing, especially in Call of Duty. It you kind of have to be versatile. You can't just be one way or the other. You gotta adapt. So the sensitivity aspect will make things so much better for you, especially with objectives, because you've got to cover a lot of ground with an objective. It's like it's a small point, but there's several avenues of approach. And if your team, say you're playing with randoms, you can't rely on them to cover that dead space for you. They can't cover the area around you. You can't trust randoms half the time. If you see they're doing good on the board and you're not getting blasted in the back every 5 seconds, then you can. But otherwise, you got to be able to adapt to that and hear that audible, like, okay, sounds like there's movement coming possibly behind me, and be able to whip around fast and pinpoint the character, because it's almost weird. It's almost like when I do those whip arounds, it's not so much I'm even visually aware of where my eyes are pinpointing. It's just like I look for the first movement on the screen that's not natural, and I just start shooting at it. That's how and then my eyes catch up to it. Because the way your eyes work is if you're moving fast, that your physical movements are actually faster somewhat than what your eyes can keep up with, to a degree. And your brain takes a second to register clearly what you're seeing. So it's you got to just be ready to compensate for that with that higher sensitivity. So that's why I try to get to higher sensitivity as quick as I can, so my brain adjusts to it.
Yeah, it's funny that you talk about kind of that reliability with your teammates, more with randoms than obviously people you play with, because as we like when we play together, there's a lot of communication as far as if I see a person that I don't have a good angle on, or I just died and I know that a teammate's close and they can make a play on it. There's obviously that communication, but like you said with randoms, it's hard to have that reliability with them, not because of their skill level or their play style, whatever it might be. And kind of one thing that that I've noticed I do from time to time, and I try to, I guess, think from other people's perspectives a little bit more, is I see a teammate and then I see an enemy between. So it goes like, as far as the way you're looking, there's an enemy, and then between you and that enemy is a teammate. So that for that quick half second, you're thinking, oh, that teammate's going to take care of him, but instead you both die. So it's like in your head, your initial reaction is, what the heck, teammate? Like I saw the guy. You're closer to him than I was. How did you not see him?
And that's
But
that
again,
delay with the first person perspective.
yeah, it's that first person perspective. It's that tunnel vision where it looks like they should have seen that person, but literally they could have been over a foot
Yep.
farther than you were. To that person was either to the left or the right, outside of that tunnel vision that they see, that they didn't see them. So and that
Yeah, hell, that's
and that's
happened to
what makes it
us.
more difficult. Yeah, that happens to us all quite
A lot.
often.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially me. For whatever reason, I'm always looking in the wrong fucking spot. You'll be, he's right there. And I'll be like,
Yeah.
there? Where?
That's a bird, Michael.
It had a shotgun. Oh.
Yeah, and what makes it even harder, and it kind of I love playing hardcore modes on Call of Duty. It's been something that like I'll play core depending on who we're playing with, just because I know there's a few of our friends that don't really enjoy playing hardcore, so I will play core with them just to kind of make everybody happy with it. Um, but kind of that situation I was just talking about, where it's you and an enemy with a teammate in between the two of you, it makes it that much harder in a hardcore mode, because if you take that shot, your accuracy has to be even tighter of a window, because either you're going to kill your teammate, or if you've already exhausted your teammate kills, you're killing yourself.
Oh yeah.
So it's such a fine line with those moments where you put that reliability on those teammates, because you realize, if I shoot right now, I'm going to kill my teammate with me. But at the
Us.
same time, you almost have to take the initiative to quick reposition yourself left or right, forward, backward, in that quick half second, to give you a better angle to be able to maximize on that situation.
And
And this is all stuff that it's also quick. It's easy. It's easy to sit and talk about it
yeah,
now, but guess what? In an hour or 2 hours, if I get on and start playing Call of Duty, I guarantee that I'm gonna fuck it up and do the exact thing I'm not supposed to do, that we were just talking about.
exactly. And to kind of go off of that, kind of go back and touch on the idea of tactics. For me personally, first person perspective makes using tactics so much more fun. There's nothing more enjoyable to me than, like, say I'm playing with you and the guys, and we're like, all right, there's a team in that building. All right, we're going to go enter and clear that building. We're going to take that team out. We use strategy, and it's so cool to get to see that in that tunnel vision perspective. Say you got a window in front of you, you're like, all right, I'm pulling a grenade. You just toss a grenade in the window, and as you're doing that, you have a teammate simultaneously push in, or like a smoke grenade, and then like, say your teammate has a thermal optic. So it's like there's a lot more specialization in first person perspective. There's like, I feel like if you play a strictly third person perspective kind of game, I feel like, yes, there are tactics you can use. You can use all the same tactics, but it just doesn't feel as thrilling to me. It doesn't feel, because, and with third person perspective, is it can get kind of clunky too when you're trying to fight. When you get in a firefight with somebody, it almost seems like, and this happens in first person perspective too, don't get me wrong, but it devolves down to, like, people jumping around and trying to see who can, like, create the weirdest situation to where they're harder to hit, which is, I see bunnies all the time in first-person perspective games like COD, and Halo was fucking known for it, but Halo's a whole different entity. That's always been a staple of Halo, is the jump around and headshot people. But uh, for example, there's not much you could run in the way of tactics in a game like Gears of War. There's not really like enter and clear a building. It's more of just you're in this building together, you're sliding up against shit, you're fucking jumping over barriers real fast with a shotgun because you can see the guy on the other side of the barrier, versus a first person perspective game. You don't know what's over there. That's dead space, and that's one of the coolest things about first person perspective versus third person is dead space. And to explain for anyone who tunes in, dead space is just any area that could conceal a person that you can't, or anything that you cannot see. So, for example, we take advantage of dead space a lot in games for with lethals like C4. You will try to place a C4 in a position, say like you see there's a desk. You will put that C4 near or under that desk to where it's not easily visually seen, but it's in a position where if you detonate it, it will still impact the person. In a third-person perspective game, you can easily typically pinpoint those things because you can see so much more of what's around the map. For example, in Fallout, you're walking by some landmines. It's kind of hard to miss them if you're in the third-person perspective, unless you're really just not paying attention, because you can see the crap on the ground while you're looking at your character, and you can it just seems it stands out more. Whereas in a first person's perspective, typically your vision is a straight line path. Most people aren't looking at their feet. Most people aren't looking at the sky. Typically, you usually have to alternate that. Whereas third person, you kind of get that full visual, and that's one of those things that I enjoy about first person is you have to be attentive. You have to look to the. So there could be a guy on a rooftop. You're not going to see that. You have to look for it.
Mm-hmm.
There could be a guy below you at a decline, and in a first-person perspective, you may not be able to see him. And this is one thing I actually bitch about sometimes with COD is perspectives and the visual. So there could be a guy who's in a sniper position up a hill, and you have no visual. There's no load-in of him. Your position is for what you believe to be obscured, but him looking down, he can see you down there. And it causes a lot of frustration because some people would deem that cheating. And those are one of those situations where I always kind of leave it like kind of with just a little bit of a open mind, where it's like, okay, it might not be cheating, it just might be the game. It might just be that he has more visuals of the graphics rendered than I do. He might have more imagery rendered on his screen than I can possibly see compared to him.
Yeah, and it's funny that you actually bring that up. That's a note that I had jotted down before we started the episode. We've been talking about a lot of the advantages, whether it's tactics, strategies, of first-person view. And one of the things I jotted down that can be definitely a downfall is, like you said, that positioning, where you, in that first-person view, you think you're behind a wall, you're behind cover, and you see a guy, and you think, oh, he can't see me, I have to drop on this guy, and then he blasts you and you die. You watch the kill cam, and you're standing out in the open, and you're like, what? Versus where in that situation, if you're in third person, you'd realize, oh shit, I'm standing out in the open. I need to move over a couple feet and get behind this wall. Whereas in first person, what you see is not what the person that's looking at you sees, because they could literally be over a couple feet where you think, oh, I'm in a good position, when really you're not. So it's kind of like what you had talked
Exactly.
about, where in those moments where you get killed or you get exploited and you're like, oh, is this guy cheating? Like, how did he see me? When it's really just you, it's you not realizing, because again of that tunnel vision of the first person view, that you don't realize. If you would probably turn, you would realize, oh shit, there's a 5 foot gap between me and that wall that I think I'm behind. I need to move over. So that's just something I wanted to touch on as you kind of talked about. It's just how important your positioning is in a first person shooter. And again, that comes back to your sensitivity, being aware of your surroundings, where you think you're in good cover. If you have high sensitivity, you can quick do a spin around and check your surroundings to make sure, okay, I am in cover, I am in a good spot. Whereas low sensitivity, that however long it takes you to spin around, you could be dead by the time you get
Exactly.
halfway around.
Exactly. And then another thing, and also just a comment to anyone who tunes in. I know we talk a lot about certain games that we play, and just to clarify, if there's any games you ever want us to check out, I mentioned this before in a video. Just feel free to comment to us, message to us, and we'll check it out and we'll review it and we'll talk about it. And if you have any like awesome first person or even third person shooters, but like that kind of challenges what we've talked about, we are more than willing to check them out because I'm always trying to expand the games I play. I'm always trying to find a new interesting game to check out, and I'm always scanning and looking for stuff, and I just play various random games, and they'll probably end up getting discussed eventually when we probably make. I was thinking maybe one day we can make an obscure video game video, or games that just were underrated. One first person game I will say that I very like I that it's first person and third person in a sense to a degree, because there's moments where it cuts to third person where you can actually use that to your advantage. It's only like when you're really getting into a Titan or anything like that, but it's Titanfall. Titanfall is a very enjoyable game that I think actually took the futuristic aspect and did it right versus whatever garbage Call of Duty tried to do. Um, but I definitely enjoyed the way they do wall running in that and the fast paced action. And you have mechs on the ground. You're literally dealing with like massive robots. Meanwhile, you're fighting people of regular size. It's such a cool game. I love it. And then one thing I was going to touch on about first person perspective, just to kind of continue with what you were saying, was yes, understanding your positioning is key. Whereas the third person, yeah, you can clearly see the gaps. You can clearly see the gaps. Whereas first person, you don't have that understanding of how close you are unless you actually pay attention to what your movement pattern is. And one thing I really enjoy, especially in games like Warzone, is having to cross big open areas. Uh, because you're first person based. Third person, it's not as scary. It's not as scary for me because I can, like, for example, in PUBG, if you're in third person while you're running in a big open area, you can continually scan your camera around you while you're running and just keep kind of like, you kind of got like a big radar system now. You can keep a visual sense of everything going on around you. While in Call of Duty, you can't exactly do that. You can't look behind you. You can't, like, while you're running, just look back, which I think would be a cool mechanic if they could integrate it without it making things difficult, without it overtaking your controls. If they had a button you could push where you just turn your head back and look back behind you while you're running, and it doesn't have to be a full visual sense, just kind of like what you'd see like if you kind of just did a side glance. Like if you could just make your head turn to the side without actually moving your gun, if you could just do that, which would be very difficult. Unless you, like, one way I thought about it was like if you had some button, like if you had to hold down one of the analog sticks or hold L1 and then you use the right analog stick while you're running while holding the run stick, you can just kind of turn your head to the left and right to just kind of see where people are at. Just to make sure your team's still with you, kind of get, instead of having to kind of like turn your whole body to look and stop running. Uh, so I think that'd be cool, but there's so much excitement in crossing big areas because you have to continue to scan while you're moving. You got to keep kind of on a swivel. You got to have rear security. You got to have rear security so that they can kind of just maintain that 360 security bubble, which because you can't do that on your own. It's a lot hard. So I think of like looking at, like, say you're playing solos in PUBG and you're only staying in third person. It's like a third person only solo, and you're playing solo in Call of Duty. There's a lot more excitement out of the first person perspective because you don't know. You don't know what's going on around you unless you're on that swivel. You're looking around, and I just think that brings a lot more enjoyment to the game.
For sure. Yeah, and kind of talking about how you had said kind of the different games we're exploring and kind of opening it up to our our viewers and obviously taking any suggestions to play new games. And one thing that's kind of, I guess, I'm starting to realize now is since we've started this podcast, I've kind of opened my eyes to a lot more games, and whether it's playing them or going back and playing games that I've recently played or I've already played, and it's kind of giving me a better appreciation for those games and giving me and for the new ones opening myself up to different genres and just kind of just because obviously as we continue this podcast, we're going to dive into more topics, whether they be broad or more narrow topics. In order to talk about them, obviously you want to know about them.
Oh
You don't
yeah.
want you don't like we don't want to talk about a topic and be like, do you know anything about it? No. Yeah, me either. I'll
Yeah.
do some research. It's like, because then that's other people's experiences, other people's perspectives. Because like it's hard with gaming to look at other people's opinions, and that's why like you see ratings for games and it's like, oh, that game got a 4 star or got a 4 out of 10 rating. It's garbage. Don't play it. It's like, okay, but that's just the people who've played it. What about like the people who haven't played it? Maybe there's some people that would say, "Oh, this game's a 10 out of 10. I love this game." Like that's one thing that's hard to say. Oh, this is a garbage game, or even a movie or a TV show, because that's only the people who have seen that can apply their thoughts, their perspective to that game. It's hard to look at a game and be like, oh yeah, this one's garbage, don't play it. It's like, yeah, but everybody has a different taste. So just
Oh
kind of
yeah,
just kind of
definitely.
circling back to, I guess my point is kind of moving forward and just more and more open to suggestions and putting more on my plate in the video game world. And guess what? There's going to be games that we jump into, whether it's on our own or suggestions from our audience, that I'm probably not going to like. But guess what? I tried them. I can say, hey, I tried that game. I do not like it. Versus we talk about it and I say, oh, yeah, according to this website and what this guy said, it's not a good game. It's like, okay. How,
Well,
like I can't use somebody else's thoughts and claim them as my own.
exactly, and that brings me to the point too that like this channel, this podcast is not about telling you guys about video game facts. Some of the things we do say are facts. This is about us just discussing what video games mean to us, and we want to share that with you. And we would love to hear your input too, and what video games have meant and impacted your like what they've meant to you and how they've impacted your life, and what really stood out to you in games, because we love to hear that stuff and I love to share that with people, because it's like these are the things I emphasize on and focus on because those are the things I love. I've talked several times about mechanics and lore. Those are the two biggest things for me. Like I love unique mechanics and I love unique lore. I for example, DayZ is a very punishing game. DayZ has been very frustrating for us because we're still adjusting to it, but it has hooked me in a way because I love that they've introduced so many mechanics into that game that there's like I was actually watching a video the other day on crafting, on how to craft on there. So I've learned so much now that I'll share with you when we play again sometime. Um, because I love to see games that challenge me to think outside of the realm that I already know in gaming, and I loved that. I love to experience that. That's why I love Dark Souls series. So anyone who tunes in is a Dark Souls fan, just be expect us to eventually talk about that subject. And there's a new game that will be released eventually, Elden Ring, which I will hopefully we can cover that, and I'll try to get you into that realm with me because I would love to introduce you to that game format because that every game that is hard is only hard if you let it continue to be hard for you. That's the way I look at it. You can beat any game if you apply yourself to it. There's not a game out there that you can't beat. Every game out there's been beaten by somebody. That's the way I look at it. Unless it's literally a game that says you will not beat this game, then obviously it told you. So don't try. But one point I wanted to make, kind of a callback, talking about field of view and perspective. I saw this really funny video that I really enjoyed. This guy, he was getting chased. He dropped his riot shield and he dropped a lot of his loot to make it look like that, like whatever. He like disappeared, but yet the riot shield was standing straight up, and this dude just laying in the prone position behind it. And this guy like looks and he's like, "Oh, where'd he go?" And he starts picking up his shit. Dude comes up behind him and kills him. And I found that to be hilarious because it plays into that field of view. That person got tunnel vision. They saw loot. And that I guarantee that happens to so many players. And it's so easy to bait people because there are smart people out there who will be like, nope, that's a trap. And you see situations like that a lot. And I've even fallen into it myself. Because I'll see a situation like, no way that's a trap. There's no way this is a trap. And it's a trap. But
Yeah.
and and I think that's one of those unique things you can that you can do in first-person perspective games. That whereas a third-person game where you're scanning, say if COD Warzone was third-person, he put all that loot down, he laid there. The dude can clearly pan his camera over, or he can at least have that visual like drop-down view, and he can see just laying there on the ground, like, and it would have been a done deal. But the things you can do to get away with. And also, cool thing is, there's so much more advantage to hiding in Warzone. You can hide in bushes, and it's a lot harder for people to pinpoint you, in my opinion, in a first-person perspective style game. Whereas a third person, you like I said, you can scan, you can look for irregularities in those bushes before you even move over there. And like, yeah, you can do that while you're aiming down your sights too. But say that person has cold-blooded on, you're not going to be able to exactly pinpoint them in that bush because there's too much um, clutter. And that's one thing I want to give a shout out to about Call of Duty as well. I love that they understand that thermal does not work through windows. Uh, and that's just that's true to real life too. Thermal does not work through reflective surfaces. So unless you use it'd be called they call it night vision and not like it's nods whatever, but it's I think it's called square box or whatever. I can't remember the exact terminology, but it's when you combine night vision. So you take that square box or night vision and you combine it with thermal. Now you can see through reflective surfaces. It's really cool. I got to mess around with some of the equipment in Maryland. It was really dope. Um, so yeah, no, I just love the cool uh, way that they have been handling Warzone outside of all the bugs and glitches. Like, I still enjoy it. I've taken a break from it to expand my gaming knowledge in other realms of gaming. One gaming industry I need to jump back into is actually sports and racing games. And I dread it, but I'm going to. I'm going to do it. But
Yeah, no, I that's one where that's one that I kind of always come back to. Um, like I play Madden, probably when the newest Madden came out, that's like all I played for like the first month. Um, but now I've been kind of expanding into different realms, and probably every couple of weeks I go on there and play a game or two, get shit on, get mad, and then switch to something else. But um, as far as racing games, I've always liked the Forza series, and I recently got Dirt 4 because it's on the Game Pass. And yeah, I'm definitely excited to explore that Dark Souls and kind of go get into games that you played that I haven't, and eventually we'll dive into some of the sports and racing and stuff. And it's gonna be more of a I guess a cut and dry like talk because it's less about like experience is and more about the feel of the game and like what you like about I guess one racing game versus a different one. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how we explore those topics. But
oh, definitely. And then one thing I want to challenge you with, Colin, is actually that I was thinking about this was we're each going to pick one game that the other person has to play with us. They have to play it with us, and it's outside of our comfort zones. You know where I sit, and I know where you sit for the most part. I'm going to challenge you, or I might even bring a game into your realm that I've played that I've enjoyed. There's a Demolition Derby game that I think I own still. I just don't have it downloaded. Very fun game. It has racing in it. It's like it's super enjoyable. So I'd love to bring you into that. But I mainly want to bring you into the Soul series with me. And I know you have games that you can bring me into that you're like, yeah, Michael would never play this, and I'm gonna do it because I need to understand a broad scope of gaming, and I want people to understand that this was what this podcast was about. And I feel like we're getting to a good finishing point, but I also just wanted to give that shout out to the people who tune in, and I want you guys to just throw out ideas to us because we love to hear feedback. We love new games. We love to try things that are outside of our comfort zone because why not? Gaming is a wonderful, expansive industry that goes to all different kinds of realms that it gives you these opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise have to do. Like you get to see and experience so many different things, and that's what I love about gaming. And also, I just want to say, if you know any unique first-person perspective games, feel free to throw them out there to us because we're always down to analyze and kind of assess it for ourselves and see how we feel about it. And I look forward to seeing games like Cyberpunk when it comes out, seeing where the direction that goes. And then another shout-out game to a first-person perspective game is the Metro series. I enjoyed their take on that. I didn't feel like the first-person perspective was the greatest in the most part. Like it was unique and it was fun game. It was a fun game. I think of it as just kind of like Russian Fallout, which a lot of people would probably get pissed for hearing that because I'm sure it has its own storyline. I played it for a bit and I'll probably go back into that series. Another one, BioShock. BioShock is another good industry that we'll probably cover in a later episode. We'll probably do it for our Franchise Friday. And I find there's a lot of cool things in those games to unpack as well. But overall, I feel like we kind of covered our base here. And
Yeah, I one thing, or when you had talked about, and we could almost make an episode out of it. Is like you said, you have me play a game that is out of my comfort zone, and I do the same for you, and then we kind of turn that into an episode where we jump on, talk about our experiences with the game, what we liked, what we didn't like, and just kind of wrap it up from each perspective. I feel like that could be a good episode for both of us to do, and then even down the road, maybe we have the audience open up and tell us what game we should play, and we'll kind of do
oh,
the same thing,
definitely.
just evaluate it. But um, so yeah, today's actually gonna be fun. So as we wrap up this episode, we're actually gonna be shortly getting back on. We're gonna be doing our Franchise Friday right away too, and we're gonna be jumping into the ever so popular Call of Duty. This is actually gonna be a two-part Franchise Friday for us. Today we'll be talking about the Modern Warfare series, along with Warzone and multiplayer, and then we're gonna and then next Friday we'll jump into the Black Ops series and zombies. So stay tuned for that, and yeah, looking forward to it.
All right. See you soon.
All
Signing
right,
off.
see you, buddy.